In Homeric Greece, the islands of Taphians lay in the Ionian Sea off the coast of Acarnania in northwestern Greece, home of sea-going and piratical inhabitants, the Taphians. Penelope mentions the Taphian sea robbers when she rebukes the chief of her suitors. The word sea is not mentioned. It is implied as far as I can tell. They are merely mentioned as robbers, translated below as pirates. Ib. Athena is disguised as Mentes, lord of the Taphian men who love their oars, Philaretmos, who accepts the hospitality of Telemachus and speeds him on his journey from Ithaca to Pylos. Ib. The Taphians dealt in slaves. The characters in this story are mythological, which means they were based on characters that signified something astronomical. I included these citations in context because these are the things mentioned in Greek accounts that the majority of academia accepted as historical, when they're not. Since the Phoenicians and Taphians are here written, we may be looking at astrotheology, not history. Athena comes from the Etruscan Minerva, who is the wisdom emanating from the head of Tinia, sometimes Tina, the Etruscan Jupiter, which the Greeks took as Zeus on account of their distaste of the sound of IU, affixed to primus ater, which became pater, thus IU pater, or Jupiter. The Latins maintained the name as Minerva, but the Greeks changed her name to Athena. If looking at this from a Celtic perspective, the name Athena makes much more sense than from a Greek one, Athena, signifying from Tina, William Betham, Celt. Etru, because when Greek words have the prefix a, it usually signifies without or the absence of. Ib. By the time of Euripides, the islands of Taphians were identified with the Echinades. In Euripides' Iphigenia at Aulis, 405 BCE, the chorus of women from Chalcis have spied the Hellenes' fleet and seen Eurytus, who led the Taphian warriors with the white oar blades, the subjects of Meges, son of Phyleus, who had left the isles of the Echinades, where sailors cannot land. According to Jacob Bryant, that radical ein, or ain, as it's written in Greek, signifies a fount. But a fount of what? Look at the name in the above passage Aenean, fount of Aeon, or Ianus, the sun. Thus, that squadron of 12 Aeneanon, transliterated as Aeneanian, would be the 12 signs of the zodiac, or 12 months, issuing forth from the source, or fountain, of the sun, Janus, the reckoner of time, Israel, Chronos. It is translated as King Gunius, but the word used is arch, which means head, and is used to typify wisdom. Signifies fruitful land, which would correspond to something like Gemini, when the first fruits were harvested, or Libra, when the wine was harvested. Gunius is allegedly from Phoenius, ancient Arcadia, the center of the Peloponnese. But, in Irish mythology, Phineas Farced is a legendary king from Scythia. Scythians are claimed to be a branch of the Pelasgians, whose name signified the prow of a ship, thus Phineas the mariner, who brought the ancient so-called Phoenician laws to Ireland, known as Feni-Archers, or Seanchus. But the ancient Irish use Etruscan words, such as Ezar, for God, and Etruscan has no affinity to Oriental languages, which means that it couldn't have come from there, but rather from Italy, which is why the Irish language is specifically similar to that which people called Sicilian Phoenician, or Punic, the root of which is an Etruscan word, puny. The lords of Elis are the lords of Elios, the lords of the sun, whether they have an astronomical significance or merely signify the priests, or holy sailors, dioi pelasgoi. The word used is, signifying ruler, lord, or master, of Zeus. Zeus is the sun in the summer portion of the zodiac when the year was divided into 3 seasons of 120 days. Hades, winter, Poseidon, spring. In Greek mythology, Meges refers to several figures, including a son of Phyleus who led Epeans in the Trojan War, and a surgeon from Phoenicia who practiced in Rome. Google say I. His name in Greek looks like Megis, which is basically Magos, which mage, or Magnus, which in Latin is great. Echinades is named after sea urchins, which might be the reason they couldn't land there on account of some urchins being poisonous. But even this may signify a portion of the sky that certain wandering luminaries can't reach on account of it being beyond the ecliptic. The point is that these stories too adjacent to priestly mysteries for anyone to consider as historically accurate. Modern scholars, such as the editors of the Barrington Atlas of the Greek and Roman world, identify the island of Taphians as the island of Meganizi just east of the larger island Lefkada, Lucas. The Taphians accounted themselves the descendants of Perseus, a constellation near the spring portion of the zodiac, for the mother of Taphias, their eponymous colonizer, was a granddaughter of Perseus and lay with Poseidon, sun in spring, equivalent to the Latin Neptune, which comes from the Etruscan Nethans, to beget the heroic founder. Another tradition holds that Taphias was one of the Leleges, and grandson of Lelex. Their most noted king was Terelaus, rendered immortal by Poseidon by the single golden hair among the hairs of his head, but undone by his faithless daughter, Cametho, who plucked it while he slept, so that the Mycenaean adventurer Amphitryon of Tiryns, a site of Etruscan-style polygonal masonry, could overcome and kill him and retrieve the cattle Terelaus' sons had rustled from Mycenae, along with many spoils besides. As he was returning with his spoils to his bride at Thebes, Zeus preceded him by one night, taking Amphitryon's shape, and brandishing a Taphian cup as a sign of his success. The king of gods fathered Heracles. They are often identified with the Tylvards, islands in the Ionian Sea. Wiki. Ib. Citadel of Tiryns. Jacob Bryant wrote, Analysis of Ancient Mythology, page 449. There was another name current among the Ammonians, by which they called their Lo-Fi, or high places. This was Taf, which at times was rendered Tuf, Tof, and Taphos. Lower Egypt being a flat and annually overflowed, the natives were forced to raise the soil, on which they built their principal edifices, in order to secure them from the inundation, and many of their sacred towers were erected upon conical mounds of earth. But there were often hills of the same form constructed for religious purposes, upon which there was no building. These were very common in Egypt. Hence we read of Taphanis, or Taphans, Taphosiris, Taphosiris Parva, and Contra Taphias, in Antonius, all of this country. In other parts were Taphiusa, Tape, Taphura, Tapori, Taphus, Taphosus, Taphatis. All these names relate to high altars, upon which they used sometimes to offer human sacrifices. Bryant provides no archaeological evidence of this claim. I suspect this element of history has been blown way out of proportion by sensationalists, although I have no doubt that prisoners, criminals, and the like were executed in this manner. Typhon was one of these, being a compound of Tuphon, which signifies the hill or altar of the sun. If this claim is true, then I suggest it indicates Typhon is older than the Egyptian Set, on account of Typhon being made up of so-called Amornian radicals, because they are the same archetype and signified the setting sun during the day, or the autumn sun during the year, when it is dying or decreasing in declination beneath its location at the equinox. Bryant continued, IPP 449-50. Tophet, where the Israelites made their children pass through fire to Moloch, was a mount of this form. 2 Kings. C23. V10. 2 Cron, C28. V3. Strong's conceded that the Hebrew taphas is from a primitive root, but it does not say what. If any of this is accurate, I'd suggest it relates to the sun seizing the signs of the zodiac that it blots out when it is in them, its arc appearing like a hill to the observer. Since we are dealing with children, and apparently the spring portion of the zodiac, I suspect the suns being burned by the fire of the king, Moloch, signifies the sun in Gemini, similar to how Kronos, Saturn, eats his children. I could go on and on about the symbolism in these names, but it'd turn into a different article and too much of it is anecdotal for me to account for. That being said, it is already conceded that Israel was a so-called Phoenician word for Kronos, a detail that modern academia never mentions as far as I can tell. Not only that, but there is nothing in the ancient archaeological record regarding a nation known as Israel, its theocracy, or its royalty. The truth is controversial at first, but as facts are revealed and considered, it becomes easier to come to terms with. We've barely scratched the surface of this subject. For those who wish to learn more about the apparent universal system of priestcraft and the likelihood of which culture spread it all over the world, invest in the Spirit World series and then the Real Universal Empire. Become a member to access the rest of this article.